Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our National Quilter Circle question and answer session, and I'm about to officially introduce you to our guest today that will be answering all of your questions. But before I do, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Leah. I am your moderator for today, and I will be the one keeping an eye on all of your questions. So you'll want to check out the chat box. That's where you'll drop your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time that we have today. You can also start out just by dropping a hello and letting us know where it is that you're watching from. We love to see all of our community members and where everybody is viewing from. We have such a wide community. And then before I again introduce our guest, one more thing I have to tell you about if you haven't already. You want to check the link in the description. So there you're going to find a bunch of free patterns. Last week, every day of the week, we had our Craft-o-ween Mini-series, and there are crafts, National Sewing Circle, National Quilter Circle. I believe we had a baking. We made some stuffed peppers. There's a bunch of fun free stuff there for you to check out. 5 projects. You can check those out for free. There's a lot of options to expand those beyond Halloween and into just general fall and autumn decorations, and also a couple of them snuck into the Christmas holiday season as well with just a few tweaks. So check those out for yourself. Those are free patterns you can download just by clicking the link in the description. That's all that I have to say. So I'm very excited to introduce our guest today. Colleen Tauke is with us. She will be answering your questions. And before we get started, I have to say welcome, Colleen. Thanks for joining us. And I'd love for you to start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to.
Well, my name is Colleen Tauke. Yes. I am a quilter, originally a sewist, I guess you would call it, construction sewer, converted to quilting and never turned back. I've been working with National Quilter Circle now for a while, and I am the managing editor for National Quilter Circle. And we are always preparing things for the season. So be looking out for, now that we've done those Craft-o-ween and those crafts for the Halloween season were so adorable. That little stuffy that looks like a candy corn is adorable. I might have to dig out my crochet hook because I do knit and I crochet. So those are some really fun things, but be ready because some more of those kinds of weeks are coming ahead. We've got some fall Thanksgiving things and some Christmas things. It's going to be so much fun.
Oh my goodness. I can't wait. I always love those weeks. There's so many great ideas, and a lot of crowdsourcing happens in the comments on those projects as well. So it's a great way to jump into, like Colleen just said, crochet sometimes, right? She's a quilter. Jump into another little craft if it's the perfect time. All right. So Colleen, I know that we are looking ahead to the future, but also if there's anything that you've been working on now that you'd like to share with us before we dig in to the comments and questions, this is your chance to let us know what you've got going on.
Okay. Well, I'll give a little sneak peek out to a project. In the past, I've done some Facebook Lives, and I created a quilt called Hill by the Lake that was for my granddaughter. It was a baby quilt. Well, baby quilts can grow up to be big quilts too. So I had a little challenge of come up with something for the holidays, kind of Christmassy, and I'm working on a stack of Christmas prints. A lot of us collect fabrics because they speak to us while we're in the quilt shops. We don't know exactly what we're going to do with them yet, but we collect, fat quarters, half yard cuts, or even collections in a fat quarter tower. And I had a bunch of really fun Christmas prints, and I decided I would oversize that triangle and then put them together and create something called Christmas camouflage. So that is something you might see pop up. This morning, I was even creating the backing for it because, those tops have to get layered up and become quilts with a backing fabric. And we had talked about this last month or so. We talked about using flannels. So I was preparing a flannel back. And to tell you the absolute truth, it's a little secret. Sometimes I make mistakes. So this morning I was getting my fabrics. I had 2 cuts of 45. I was ready to sew them together. I matched my plaid beautifully, stitched it and opened it, and I put it together wrong. So out comes the seam ripper. Away I go. It is now the correct dimension for my quilt. So any of you out there in a hurry trying to get those Christmassy things going or those holiday gifts, double check your alignment if you're putting together 2 strips to make a back. Because especially if you've been matching plaids, it's just so disheartening to have to take out the good old seam ripper there and remember to breathe and slow down. So that's my cue to you. All of you, double check yourself before you stitch it. Don't be me today.
All right, with that being said, it's time to dig into some questions. Before I go, our fantastic behind the scenes team has also dropped a link to those Craft-o-ween Mini-series projects into the chat box. So if you haven't seen it in the link in the description, it's in the chat box as well. And we've got lots of hellos coming in from viewers. We've got Olive saying hi, Patricia from North Carolina, Debbie from Virginia. So hello and welcome to everybody. We're going to do Jenna's question first. And Jenna asks, what projects could I complete before Christmas if I start right now? What do you think?
Well, it depends on if you want to eat and sleep.
Okay.
If you have a full-time job, you're going to have to find something that's doable, something that won't take a lot of time. So maybe it's going to be working maybe as an inspiration, as a panel, as a center of a quilt with some simple borders. If you want to make a throw for a friend or even for your own family room or a family member, something simple that lets the fabric read as a big print maybe in the center with some very simple borders. The only thing they're going to have to be thinking about is getting it quilted. Now, if you are a person who doesn't mind quilting on your domestic machine, then you easily could get it finished. If you're a person that's sending it off to a long arm quilter, that could be an issue. I would contact them first to make sure they have an opening that they can get your project quilted and back to you to put binding on before you're wanting to gift that. The other kinds of projects, go into those smaller projects. Create a wine bottle holder, placemats, table runners. Those are all fun things to add a little color, a little warmth to our homes as we start to decorate for Christmas. There's going to be a tree skirt possibly coming up in the near future at National Quilter Circle. So look for that as a Facebook Live. The example's upstairs, so I can't grab it right now. But there are some of those smaller projects that we can get done and completed and have that sense of satisfaction. So go to the smaller side, something you know you can quilt yourself. Unless, of course, you have a friend who's a long armer who can bump you into the lineup and get that quilt completed. So that kind of hinges right now because we're getting into late October and long armors are usually done by the 1st of December, getting things in and turned around. So I would start there.
All right, I actually want to add on, Colleen, and wonder if you'll talk just a little bit about sourcing fabric or maybe tools. If you don't have something right now, where would you recommend going, and what might be too late to get your hands on by a certain point?
Okay, when it comes to tools, if you're going to be picking a project, that I would pick a project that's fairly simple that you could easily use the types of tools that we normally cut fabric with, some of those longer rulers. So you're cutting probably squares and rectangles. If you're looking at a project that takes a specialty ruler, yeah, I would double check to make sure that if you want to order something that is in stock right now, otherwise you may not be able to get a hold of it. Talk to other quilters. There may be quilters out there who have multiples of tools because sometimes we buy more than one just to have a spare, and they may be willing to loan you tools also because specialty rulers are maybe a little bit harder to get a hold of right now. So I would say crowdsource with some quilters in your area, or even ask in a local quilt shop if there's a quilt guild around, quilt instructors around that may be willing to loan out tools for you. Then when you realize you really need one of those, then you go back and buy one. When it comes to fabrics, most of the fabric stores that I have been in recently here in the Midwest received their Christmas fabrics. If you're looking for Christmassy kinds of fabrics or winter prints, did receive all of their fabrics a little bit late. So the availability has been really good here in the Midwest. I can't speak for everywhere in the United States, but as I was talking to shop owners and managers the other day, they were saying, we're still getting a few pieces that were delayed. So their stock right now is really fairly good. Don't take that as the norm, though, because at this time of year, on a normal year, because we're still kind of in the abnormal time here after COVID, usually by this point, most Christmas fabrics are pretty much depleted in shops. And that is not what I am finding right now. I'm seeing that they still have quite a few fabrics, and even will be probably pushing into mid-November, still having those in stock. So if you're going to be shopping local, which I kind of stress because those local shops, because I was working in one during the pandemic, really struggled and they really need your support. So find that local quilt shop. If you don't know of any in your area, Google and see if you can find something that's fairly close to you. A lot of them have gone to online by posting most of their fabrics or at least photos of it. So sometimes you can actually online order from those shops. You can do curbside pickup if you don't feel comfortable going into a shop. So that way, or you can phone order. So really support those local quilt shops, because as quilters, we want that source of fabric to always be available for that quick trip in when we need that one little piece. So really support them for your tools and your fabric supplies.
All right, thanks for covering all of that. I know this is a kind of a wonky year for sourcing certain things, so I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure you got a chance to speak on that.
Yep.
Oh, hello. We've got a viewer all the way in Mexico. Welcome,
Oh, wonderful. That's fabulous.
Nina's got our next question here. Nina wants to know if you need to have a long armor if you're making a table runner.
No. A table runner is something that you can easily accomplish on your own. Actually, for us as long armors to do a table runner will take us longer to load it onto a long arm than it would to actually quilt it on a domestic machine. So you can easily accomplish that on your domestic machine. If you're not free motion comfortable at this point, a lot of really great stitch in the ditch or straight line quilting, or even what we call cross hatching, so that you create kind of a diamond or square on point kind of effect across your quilt, can create a beautiful design. So don't be afraid that, with a small project like that, you can accomplish that on your own. If you haven't done that before, I believe that we have some really good resources in our video collection at National Quilter Circle. So you could get some really good tips on layering up your quilt top, your patchwork portion, and your batting and your backing, whether you want to pin based or spray based those layers together, and then how to get started. So go back to those videos, get some really good solid tips on doing machine quilting. Other things that you might think about wanting to use, let's see if I can find mine. These poor guys look kind of sad. There are lots of different tools that you can use if you want to do something other than free a walking foot straight line quilting. If you want to try a little bit of free motion quilting, quilting gloves I have found are a reminder to me not to grip the fabric with a death grip, but to use my fingers to lightly move the quilt under the needle. So they come in different kinds. These poor guys have holes in the ends of the fingers from being used so much, but they just have a light grippiness to the inside, so that they'll stick to my fabric just enough so that I have a grip of the layers, so I can easily move that under the machine needle. The other kind, this one is a more of a knit, or a polyester knit, and it has kind of dirty fingers, but it has a kind of a coating to each fingertip, and that again will help pick up the fabric a little bit, so you have a little better grip, and you remember not to grab a hold, but to gently move it under the machine. So there are different kinds. This one is called machingers, and they come in different sizes, I believe medium, large, and maybe extra large. And I usually have the smaller ones because I have short fingers. These are made by Fons and Porter. They're a cotton knit and have the grip beads on the inside. You can find also, if you don't have access to these and you're in a pinch, go to your local garden shop or where they sell bedding material or flowers. Sometimes you can find garden gloves that are very similar to these. They may be a little bit heavier because they're meant to be in the garden, but they tend to have a grippiness to the inside for pulling weeds. And they work really well also as quilting gloves so that you have that grippiness, but they have a breathability to the backside of the fabrics for your hands. So those table runners you can get done very easily.
Very good luck with that. Hope that helps. Now, for our next question, Colleen, you are not alone. I know you said the secret, you have made a mistake before. Someone else has as well.
That's everyone raise your hand. I have made silly mistakes. Yes.
So Margaret is going to see if you can steer her in the right direction here.
Okay.
So Margaret says, I screwed up with a binding on the first machine quilted quilt that I made. I had originally thought to use the 2.5-inch strip as just a border, but realized it makes a lovely binding. Anyway, to make a long story short, I am totally confused on how to miter the corners on this binding, and any help would be appreciated.
Okay, that's going to be a really hard to do visual here, I'm afraid. We do have great tutorials on applying binding, and you can find ones out there to make that miter. I know when you're first attempting it, it seems so awkward, and it seems like, why am I doing this? Why? Because we're working with a binding toward, the fold toward the center of our quilt, and we have to allow enough fabric to get around the corner. Let me see if I have a piece of binding strip. Oh, does every quilter have a piece of binding strip available? Let's see what I can come up with for a visual here. I need a piece of fabric, and I have, of course, a stack of fabric sitting here. Okay, nothing like having leftovers from Craft-o-ween Halloween projects. Okay, we're going to pretend this orange fabric is our quilt top. It has batting and backing underneath of it, but we're going to talk. We want to see just the quilt top portion. Now, binding. There are going to be some more points you're going to need to find a video for, but applying the binding and getting around the miter is kind of a trick. So this happens to be black. Sorry, it is solid black, but you're going to fold wrong sides together. You're going to have a fold on one side. You're going to have long cut straight edges on the opposite. You're going to apply the binding with the cut edges of the binding aligning with the cut edge or the outside edge of your patchwork. So it's going to align like this. Let's see if I can find, oh, I love having tools right nearby. Okay, you're going to stitch that binding on. You're going to use you're going to use your 1/4-inch seam. Your backing and your batting, think about this, the backing and the batting, the underneath pieces should be just a little bit longer than this 1/4 inch. So you're going to want to leave those pieces a little bit longer. But you're going to be applying the binding even, because if we think about the math and the engineering that went into creating that pattern, 1/4-inch seams are what's allowed throughout most quilt patterns. So we just want to use a 1/4-inch seam here so that the border or whatever our patchwork still has maybe points along the outer edge or intersections that will be in the proper proportion. So we are going to fold as we get to the corner. Let me see if I can mark this so it can be seen. I would apply the binding of the 1/4-inch seam. Leah, can you pick up that line at all? I'm not sure if it's going to be
very
enough.
barely. It's pretty faint.
Okay, so there's a 1/4-inch dotted line along here, and you're going to stop 1/4 inch before the end of your patchwork. And you're going to, if you want to do like a real little reinforced stitch right there, right on top of each other, then break the thread and take it out of the machine. Then you're going to realign this binding strip so it goes around the corner, because we want it to be continuous, right? You're trying to create that miter.
can you pull that back closer to your body so we can see
Yep.
Yes,
I
right
was just trying to get it so my fingers could hold it. What I'm creating, and I'm going to hold this up, you'll see a little triangle right here. It looks kind of like a mast on a little ship or a paper football from third grade. Remember when we folded up paper footballs in little triangles and when you kicked them, you played a game at your desk? Well, I've got a triangle of fabric here that's folded upward away from my patchwork. And as I fold that up and away, you'll find better videos than this little quick tutorial. But we're going to create the next 1/4 inch seam as we go around the corner. And let me mark this. And maybe if I pin it, where my pins are at, if I pin this to my board, I can hold it closer to the camera. And then the camera will be able to see it better. Okay. Now, as you see, I'm starting at this spot. There's a little dot there. That's where my folded little football shape is coming up from the quilt top. And then I'm going to proceed down the next side of my quilt. You need this triangle of fabric in order to make the turn around to the back and refold. So when you get positioned here, if you don't have a little triangle of fabric flap sticking up from your quilt top, you haven't left enough fabric for that turn around. So look for some videos at National Quilter Circle. We've got some really great things about binding there, and you will have the perfect miters, I promise. There are some, it just takes a little bit of patience, and remember to breathe, because when we hold our breath, it's when we get too nervous about things, we need to remember to breathe so our brain can work. But as long as you're stitching a 1/4 inch to within the edge of, or the corner of your patchwork, break thread, take it out of the machine, kind of flip that triangle of that little flap of binding to the other side, begin again, 1/4 inch down the other side. I promise it will work out.
All right. Well, Margaret dropped in a little more detail here. So we've got some good tips on mitering, but unfortunately, I don't think that's going to help Margaret. So let's continue on here.
Right.
The binding that I want to use is already on the quilt, but it's as a border. I trimmed the backing and cannot seem to convert the border into a binding. So Margaret's done normal binding before, but cannot seem to make the fold on the sewed on border / binding situation that Margaret.
Yeah, because it's probably not enough there to go all the way around to the back.
Yeah.
At this point, your option might be to do a knife edge on the outer edge of your quilt. And you can go to the videos that we have done for Facebook Live. Look for As the Seasons Turn. It's one I did just a few weeks ago. It's a bindingless edge, and I'm turning that out, the outer strip of fabric under along with the backing, and then hand stitching it down. So that might be an option. Because you've trimmed everything that's still okay, you still have enough seam allowances, you may have to trim just a little bit more, but maybe that might be your option. In order to roll something that's already stitched on there, you would have to trim the batting and backing further to do the roll to the back. So your quilt would end up being a bit smaller at that point. So either that or look to your scraps and see what you have left. You might be able to do a scrappy binding on the outer edge of your quilt. It's another option.
Well, good luck, Margaret. I hope that one of those solutions works out for you. We're going to move into a little bit of clothing next, Colleen. Okay. So this comes in from Cheryl. Cheryl says, my granddaughter wants a quilted jacket. Is there anything that I should stabilize or reinforce? My first time creating clothing out of my quilts, but she's really looking forward to it.
Quilted jacket. Her and I must be in the same mode because I've seen some really adorable ones recently, and it's gotten me thinking about making one again. I made one years ago, and I really enjoyed it. But the ones today are even more fabulous with lots of bright colors and things in them. The biggest thing to make sure is take correct measurements, and then match that to the measurements of the pattern. Hopefully you're using a well-tested pattern so that you know that it will be generous enough. The worst thing to have happen is for it to be too small. That's not what we want to have happen. If nothing else, you can always make it a little smaller, but you can't put it back on once it's trimmed off. So make sure that the measurements are accurate. Length that she wants, you've got figured out in that process of determining what size to make. When it comes to stabilizers and things, I don't think with the batting layer in there, I don't think you would need it to be any thicker or any heavier. It's going to have a lot of structure already with the batting involved in that. I would also double check the shrinkage on the batting, because how do I say this? A lot of our battings are either 100% cotton or a cotton polyester blend. So maybe pick one that has a little less shrinkage, unless she wants that really shrinky look to the jacket when it's done. That can also affect the size. So keep that in mind. Maybe fit it as you go. Once you've got backing or the back assembled, double checking. Making sure you always wash in cold water, just so you don't have excessive shrinking. But the batting itself usually creates enough structure that I don't think a stabilizer or anything on the back of the fabric is really needed at that point. I've seen some fabulous jackets created lately, and it's like, oh, I really want to make one of those. I just need more time.
Oh my goodness, it sounds exciting. So hopefully
Yes.
that helps, and your granddaughter will be thrilled with the outcome. So good luck. We're going to stay cozy here with our next question, Colleen. This one comes from Susan. So Susan wants to know, what would you recommend as the softest fabric for pillows?
Softest fabric for pillows. Washed cotton. Cotton softens with use. If you want something that's really soft and cuddly feeling, the plush fabrics that are out there. I was actually in a shop recently while somebody was trying to match a really pretty kind of upholstery kind of fabric that they wanted to make a pillow out of, but then they wanted to back it with a cuddle fabric or a plush fabric. So something Cuddles made by Shannon. Moda makes Minky, those soft velvety feels. They are very soft on the back of pillows. So if you're wanting to make something that has that kind of snuggle in, watch a great movie kind of thing, maybe using one of those fabrics, either for the back side or the front side, because you can quilt through those fabrics also. And they create a fun texture when they're quilted, because I've used it on the back of a quilt, and it just increases the texture feel when you use a plush fabric on the back of a quilt. So those would work great as pillows too.
All right, I am going to take a moment here. We've been at this for just a little bit. If you are just joining us, you weren't with us right at the beginning, I want to draw your attention to the chat box. That's where I'm getting all of your questions for Colleen. And we also have a fantastic behind the scenes team that has dropped a few links in throughout our time together. So there is a link in the chat box to the Craft-o-ween Mini-series. Those are free patterns that you can get for yourself from a bunch of projects that we did last week live. You can get those replays and the patterns with a link that you can find in the chat box or in the description. And then also, Margaret just talked us through a problem that she had mitering a corner and then discovering that maybe we didn't need to miter, we were just going to use the border. And Colleen, you referenced a video. Our team has dropped in the link to that video that you referenced in the chat box as well. So if you are hanging on to a question or you want to check out any of those resources, now is the time to head to the chat box. We're going to get to a few more questions in the time that we have, as many as we have before we have to say goodbye. But this was my moment to jump in and remind you all. So it's time to move on to our next question here, and this one comes in from Hope. And Hope asks, can you suggest how to keep directional fabric oriented when you're doing HSTs?
Half square triangles. A design wall is helpful. When you're working with half square triangles, when you splice across a directional fabric and open them up, you get kind of a shift in what's going on the pieces. And if you're going to be arranging them and you want to have kind of the top and a designated bottom to your quilt, and you're going to be using those and arranging those, a design wall is really helpful to keep everything oriented. I had Sadly, if you'd have seen my living room floor the last couple of days, Christmas camouflage was laying all over my living room floor. Not the best way to stay organized. A design wall is really, really helpful. So if you have a space to put up temporarily, it doesn't have to be permanently installed, a design wall. It can be made from like a wool felt. It can be, you can purchase design walls that are kind of vinyl on one side and it looks like actually a brushed tablecloth on the back side. It's got that fuzzy feel to it, kind of a flannelized back. I have one that happens to have rings across the top so that if I just put in small push pins into the wall, I can easily put those rings up, hook the rings on, and then I have a temporary design wall that I can easily lay my pieces out so I can step back and then use my phone to take a picture to make sure I've got things, spread apart if I'm dealing with values. If I'm dealing with wanting to make sure orientation is correct, then I can also take note as they stay in place on a design wall. Another thing that if you don't have a wall to place it on, those design walls can, or a flannel back tablecloth that you can get at any big box store really inexpensively, can be laid across the top of a bed so that you can lay your pieces out. And yes, if you're in a small house like mine, you have to sleep in that bed later. So it can easily be folded or rolled to the center and then slid right underneath the sofa. Nobody knows it's under there. So that you can easily slide it back out when you're ready. All the pieces are in place. You don't have to start all over again. So that there are ways of hiding away that design wall per se, if you don't have a place to permanently install it. I mean, I live in a smaller home, so I don't have huge spaces for things. So sometimes it's the living room floor, but it was on a design wall and literally did get rolled up and slid away so that it wasn't in the middle of the room all night. So think about utilizing spaces you have efficiently so that you can use that design wall, because once you get it in place, you don't want to have to pick all of it up and do that work all over again. And some people are really conscious about, the top and the bottom of their quilt, especially maybe if it's going to be displayed in a spare bedroom or on a wall. So you have everything oriented, with if it's got characters or animals, heads up, feet down. Others of us just let it be wherever it falls in the quilt, because a quilt is used in all directions. So as you look down on it, the animals or characters will smile back at you no matter which direction they're oriented. So.
All right. I like a lot of those ideas. I feel like you've had a lot of secrets for us today.
It must be true confessions of a quilter today.
Indeed. We're hiding little details everywhere. Ooh, speaking of hiding, this is our next question comes from Rory. Rory's in Hawaii. Hello and welcome.
Oh, wow.
So Rory is creating a hidden pockets patchwork quilt for an advent calendar. Colleen, do you have a video? Rory has lots of pieces, lots of thoughts. Can you point Rory in any particular direction, or what kind of thoughts do you have for a project?
That one is not one I've actually done. Friends of mine have made those. There may be a video out there. I'm not sure at this point. But advent calendars I love because I have tons of different kinds in my own home. So kudos to making an advent calendar. I love the countdown process. It's great for kids to see that progression, and even for adults to have that progression of we're moving towards something full of joy. If you've got a lot of small pieces, it's really important to keep organized so that if you know that the certain pocket goes with a certain number or symbol on your advent calendar, use either little wonder clips, the little tiny clips to hold stacks of things together so it stays organized, or pin through those so that you can keep things organized but work one at a time. If you haven't made one before and you're kind of trying to work through the process, and I've done this with lots of different projects before, because I can dream up an idea, but maybe I've never done it before. But use some scraps of fabric from a previous project. Hopefully you haven't thrown everything away. If you're a quilter, you're going to end up with scraps at some point. Practice on those scraps of how you're going to create those little pockets and how they're going to go on, so that you kind of get that kindergarten learning curve out of the way before you jump into your final project. I would say Google and see if there are any others out there. I don't know if National Quilter Circle has anything with an advent calendar with pockets in it. That our wonderful behind the scenes gal will probably try and see if we have anything like that. Nothing it really comes to mind. But just like I said, just practice through the process with some scrap fabric first to get it kind of smooth how you want to create it. If those pockets have to be turned and edge stitched or anything, or if there's just a folding process, because some of the advent calendars out there are created pre-printed so that there's a folding process that creates the pockets. And at first, it's really hard to see how it comes together, but with a little pin in place and test it before you stitch, that sometimes will help kind of get our brains wrapped around how we're going to be doing that process.
Okay, we've got 2 questions in a row, one about backing, one about batting. So
we're building a quilt.
We're going to start with Ramona, and Ramona is curious, Colleen, what type of backing to use for a pillow if you're quilting the front.
You can use just about anything on the back, and I think I have. The one that I made in our little mini series last year for Christmas was quilted on the front. The backing, oh, that one I did have a quilted back also. I guess if you wanted to have that structure all the way around, sometimes quilting the back is another step that it just kind of gives it a finished look, right side and wrong side. But you can use just about anything on the back of a pillow, and I think I probably have over the years. Like I said, a plush fabric works great. You could even use a corduroy or a velveteen on the back. But a lot of times people like to have the same fabric front and back, because if you see the pillow from the side, if there's a sharp change in color, some people like to have that more continuous look. So the same fabric to the front as the back, or as the back from the front. But it depends on what the front is made out of. If it's pieced, I would probably pick one of the fabrics, maybe a darker fabric that kind of coordinates with the top that you've created. If it's something that has a lot of machine embroidery or something, and you're just kind of bordering it, I would then maybe use whatever you bordered it for also the backing. So the back is really a personal choice. It's kind of like the backing on a quilt. It's kind of what pleases your eye and what your home is like. My living room is definitely not a living room out of one of those fancy magazines. My living room is a lived-in space that we all feel very comfortable, and the pillows get tossed around and stomped on by grandkids. So it has to be something durable in my living room. So pick something that fits your lifestyle, and maybe it's something simple that's going to be seasonal, then it's going to be covered with something else and put away so that you go along with the seasons. Or if that's going to be a permanent pillow that's not going to have another slip cover over the top. So it's one of those personal choices. It's hard to give a hardcore answer, finish answer, last answer on that one, because it's kind of like creating the back of a quilt. It's really a personal choice.
Well, the good news is it doesn't seem like you can go very wrong.
No.
That's great. All right, let's move to the batting now. BATTING for anybody that is out there just listening. Judy has this question, and Judy, very similar. What is the best batting to use in a table runner?
Table runner. Okay. There are different choices, different opinions on this one. Some love to use a very thin batting. I'm trying to think. The one that a girlfriend of mine uses is called Thermore, and it's a very dense, low loft batting so that it doesn't create a very large kind of a transition from the tabletop onto that table runner. And it stays very flat. It doesn't get that crunchy look of a used quilt, kind of, if you use 100% cotton and you have a lot of shrinkage. So Thermore is, I believe, a polyester batting, and it's very, very flat. And it works okay. It doesn't create a lot of loft or noticeable contouring when you do your quilting on it, so you want to probably keep it fairly simple. Others will use, something like 100% cotton, warm and natural, something that's, it's also a very low loft batting inside there, but it does have shrink. So you have to, be thinking about that. But I tend to use whatever I have leftover pieces of for my table runners. So mine kind of have a hodgepodge of what's inside them. So nobody really knows.
It's yet another secret for today.
Yes, definitely.
All right, let's move on to Linda's question. Linda asks, how do you join bias cut strips for making a binding?
Okay, bias cut strips. Whenever you're making a binding and joining ends, it's always best to do a diagonal join of those pieces. So let's see if I can come up with enough of an example quickly here. And then I need a ruler. Let's see. I'll pretend I'm joining a black and an orange together. Maybe that'll help me out today. You can do end-to-end binding, which means straight edge to straight edge. That is always a possibility. In a pinch, if you're short and you don't quite have enough to do a diagonal piecing, because diagonal piecing will take more fabric than an end-to-end join. There are times when I have done it that way. But in the majority of the time, we're doing a diagonal join between ends, whether or not it's bias cut or straight of grain binding. This is the way I just always tend to join my pieces. So let me see here. We're going to get to an angle cut, but what I really want to show is that we're starting with two pieces and they're square at the end. And what we're going to be doing is putting right sides together. So in a solid situation, that's the only fabric I had handy. Just take note that is right sides together. Need to see if I can find a marking pen that will work on a peach color here. Let's see, go for a dark, hopefully this will show up on the peach. Right sides together. And, here, I'm going to get another little tool. We all have our favorite tools. This is my favorite little guy. Whenever I'm doing binding, he's a little tiny 3.5-inch square ruler. He's got a really great marking of a diagonal across it. And so I can easily use this to go in and mark a diagonal line using the 45-degree line. So the 45-degree line is, I got to get back a little closer to me here. The 45-degree line is aligned with one of the long sides of your binding. And then you're going to draw a diagonal line. Oh, I drew it really crooked. I drew it twice. Just pick one of these. Don't pick two. But a diagonal line, so that's a 45-degree angle along the bottom and up the side. Then right sides together. And you will inevitably put these together wrong because everybody does it if you're just beginning to do this. You're going to join these, and I'm going to put a couple pins in so that the edges are matched up here. So you have a nice squared off edge, and you can match those edges there. And then you stitch on that diagonal line. Now, here's the test that you did it right. I'm going to place my pin in the diagonal line so we can pretend that I've stitched across this. And if I open it up, this now makes a straight line. That means you've joined them properly. Inevitably, don't feel bad when you go and do something that looks kind of like, I'll show you in just a second. Let me put the pin in. We're pretending to stitch. Or something like this, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not going to open up to, that makes a corner. That does not make a straight line. So the orientation is right sides together. And as I pick this back up, I'm going to point something out to you. This makes an L shape, right sides together, and it makes an L shape. so that when you fold down, and sometimes when I was starting to quilt at the very beginning, I would actually put that pin in there and test to make sure that when I stitched this, it would create a straight line. Because inevitably there was times when I'm like, oh no, where's that seam ripper at? So, if it's something new to you, make sure that as you join them, you're joining a seam here, that it opens to make a straight line. Now, once you've stitched that diagonal seam, you can trim away the outer. You can leave approximately a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. Take a scissors and trim it away. And then you will be able to take that to the iron and press to join your pieces together. So you do the exact same process, whether you're working with straight of grain binding or bias binding. Now, if you're cutting bias strips, and if you've never done this before, it's not going to quite make sense to you, but the person who asked the question, if you cut those bias strips and you've got triangles at the outer edge, like this, whoops, you've already got triangles at the outer edge, and you're worried about whether or not you can meet those up properly to make a nice straight piece, square it off and go back to this. Square it off so that you can do that diagonal seam nice and neat there and create those nicely linked pieces of binding for your quilt. Because if you're doing bias binding, you also need to be just a little gentle, because remember, bias strips are stretchy because the grain is running like this, kind of at an angle. So it has a stretchability in your strip. So be very, very gentle. I used to describe it to my students as hold it as if it was butterfly wings. Very gentle. Don't tug on it, because it will give and it will stretch and distort. So just be very gentle with it as you move it from the sewing machine to the iron and then back to the machine to apply it to your quilt. But bias binding is very fun, and joining bindings becomes second nature, but you have to do it. It's one of those skills that we get better at the more times we do it.
All right, so practice makes perfect.
Exactly.
All right, once again, our team behind the scenes has been busy, so there is a little instructional video that they were able to find and drop in about making little pockets, so it might be helpful for those
perfect
projects. We have time for a few more questions. Again, we're going to get to as many as we can. We'll jump right into Patricia's next. Patricia asks if you can recommend a good hand lotion for quilters. So going into cool weather, it's making my hands so dry, but some lotions are just a little too greasy.
Yeah, that's a really tough one, because the main ingredient in most of them is either a lanolin or some kind of an oil to get to help our hands. I have a recipe for a homemade hand lotion that, follow my Facebook page, I will put up later today. A quilter gave it to me, and it is a bizarre recipe, but it is very light, and yes, it does have an oily substance in it, but because it's very light, and she was a nurse. So as an OR nurse and a quilter, I took her recommendation and I love it, and I've made it for years. So if you follow me on Facebook, I'll put that recipe up. Cetaphils are also a very good product that's out there. You can find it at big box stores. It comes in a white jar. It's a very thin, so it adds the moisture that we need, but not extremely greasy. It doesn't have very much of a scent. That can be the other issue, that there are so many scented lotions and body lotions and hand lotions on the market that for some people it's too much. Trying to think if there are any specific quilter products that I haven't seen too many, that are promoted by quilters or seen in quilt shops even. So that, I know what you mean though, because I've always been lucky to inherit my dad's hands. And usually in the wintertime, you find me with a Band-Aid on my thumb, because the fabrics that we work with do draw the oils out of our hands, very much so. And I tend to get a crack down the backside of my thumb in the wintertime. So I usually got it wrapped with a Neosporin or something to try and get it to heal over. But I know what you mean, because the fabrics do draw the moisture out of our hands, and it's kind of an uphill battle. But the other thing is to remember to drink your water. Either a water bottle, I've got a cup of water. That is a really important fact that a lot of us as quilters may be ignoring, because we're trying to put something onto the outside of our skin, but this might be the one thing, not coffee, water. Coffee, caffeine will dry you out. Water is the best thing that we could probably do. So refill morning and afternoon if you've got a big water bottle out there.
That's a great tip, and you're right. I think people forget about that. So you
Mm-hmm.
can address the outside, but also the inside as
Inside.
well. All right, Margaret has dropped in a tip for table runner batting that we were talking about earlier. Old
Good.
flannel seems to have worked for
Ah,
Margaret.
yes. And that I totally forgot about that. I have used a flannel layer in between before also. Just inexpensive white flannel or light gray, depending on what color your table runner is.
All right. We're going to jump back just a little bit. Hope has dropped in a little more detail about the keeping the directional fabric going. So that was where we started to talk about the design wall.
Mm-hmm.
So Hope seems to think that cutting is the issue. So do you have recommendations for when you're cutting directional fabric, keeping it so that the design would run in the way you mean it to?
Okay. Well, if you're going to be working with triangles, that can be an issue, because, as like I said, if you start with a square of fabric and you have all the figures with the heads up, feet down, as you slice into it, and if you need to turn that other triangle to be oriented the same, you're going to have one side upside down always. So it may be something that you might just have to let go and let the design run the way it wants. Or you're going to have to fussy cut each of the triangles, maybe with using a template, and then maybe not wasting quite as much fabric. But if you're starting with a strip of fabric and then cutting squares and cutting into triangles, you're going to get some waste if they all have to be oriented in the same direction. So one of the things that you might want to try, it's one of this, as you think about things longer, sometimes what I have done is I have cut a piece of template plastic in the shape that you need, and mark the top. So all my triangles have to be a certain direction. And then look at the orientation as you lay it over your fabric, where you're going to have to place those. And if you're going to be using your fabric efficiently, it's going to be hard. Like I said, every time you turn and twist, you're going to be worrying about bias edges and off grain. So maybe that directional fabric might need to be paired up with a different pattern. Sometimes directional fabrics can be more of a headache than we want them to be. So that's why sometimes I just kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, you all just figure yourself out, because in the Christmas camouflage quilt, there are owls and they are directional. But some of my owls are going to fly upside down and sit in the tree upside down, because, somebody's going to be snuggling on the other side of the quilt with me. So if they'll see them from their direction, I'll see them from mine.
All right. Well, thanks for clarifying that for us, Colleen. We appreciate it. We have time for one, maybe two more questions. So let's go into a little bit more batting again. So we've got a viewer that wants to know, what batting should they use for a baby quilt? I have washed cotton pieces on the front and minky fabric on the back, and will be attempting to free arm quilt this project.
Okay. When it comes to batting for baby quilts, there are probably two main choices: a cotton polyester blend, so that it dries a little bit quicker, because with the minky or the plush fabric on the back, that blanket or quilt is going to be needed to be dried in a lower temperature, because it can damage the plush fabric if it's dried at a high temperature. So it's going to go into a lower temperature. So you're not going to get a lot of excessive shrinkage if you use like an 80-20 or an 70-30 blend, polyester cotton blend batting. You could use 100% cotton. It's definitely an acceptable batting, and always has been, because that was kind of the standard for years, that I was 100% cotton. But if you want it to be something that dries even quicker, a polyester batting is the direction to go. If it's going to be a quilt, or kind of that lovey that's going to be drug around a lot, the nice part about using a polyester batting, and you can get a lighter weight poly batting, is that it is lightweight. It doesn't add that extra weight to the quilt. So when a kid wants to go drag it around, it's not something you have to tug behind them. It's easily picked up and away they go. And it dries faster. I know when I made a quilt for my niece, I should have used polyester batting, because I remember getting the calls from my sister saying, she won't take a nap until the dryer stops. And I'm like, what? Well, she had been sleeping with that quilt, and there had been a little accident in the night, and everything had to be washed, but she wasn't going to take a nap until the ducky quilt came out of the dryer. And in order to speed up that drying process, if I would have used polyester batting, she would have gotten to her nap a few minutes earlier. So a polyester batting might be the way to go.
All right, well, that sounds fantastic. I hope that works out so well for you and your project. We've reached the end of our time together, so I always love to give our Q&A provider a chance to give us some final thoughts. So, Colleen, I'd like you to send us off before I say the final goodbye with anything that you may have come to mind for you throughout this hour, but you didn't get a chance to talk about. And absolutely let us know where we can find you, where we can find your upcoming projects, so that we can keep in touch with you. So go ahead.
Okay. When we're getting down to the wire now, we're almost to the 1st of November. Those projects that we want to finish for the Christmas season and gift giving, think doable. Think things, they're coming from your heart, so they don't have to be huge. So think about things that you can fit into the time slot that you can actually finish at this point. So make that list and double check it. If you're using a long armor, double check with them. Don't worry about quilts and projects being huge. Anything that you make as a gift right now is going to be loved by whoever receives it. So make something that you enjoy. Remember that choices like backings and pillow covers and which batting to use is a personal choice. We really don't have a quilt police that's going to arrest you by making the certain choice that has to be perfect. We all learn from the things we make. So jump in, have fun, and enjoy the process.
All right, thank you for those final thoughts, Colleen. I'm going to send us off with just a few reminders as well. Always go back through that chat box. Like I said, our team has dropped in some fantastic links, including the link to our Craft-o-ween Mini-series. There's still some time to jump into some of those projects. Those are 5 free patterns that you can go ahead and grab and do on your own time. Look through all of the other links as well, some of which Colleen mentioned, some videos that are great resources for you. And there's a little bit of crowdsourcing happening with some of the ideas that we talked about towards the end. So some lotions that you can try out. We have a great community, and that's all in the chat box. So with that said, though, we have reached the end of our time, and I have to say thank you for joining us. Thank you, Colleen, for all of your fantastic expertise, the advice that you shared today, and of course, thank you to all of you for watching us. So this Q&A with the National Quilter Circle is done, but there will be more, so we can't wait for you to come back and join us for another one. Keep your eyes peeled, and until then, happy quilting.